Fans of Warhammer 40,000, thank you very much for joining me for a video where I'm going to talk about the new line of fiction that Games Workshop has just started advertising. And this is the two novels which come under the Warhammer Adventures series. And to tell you what it is, if you've not heard, and I'm sure you have heard from various other commentators who have done pieces on this, such as Macra at the Outer Circle, Arch Warhammer, Kirioth and others. It's a series of books that are aimed at 8 to 12 year olds, and basically it's going to create a series of characters and they're going to go on some adventures. So this is kind of like fiction for kids and fiction for younger kids. And I thought I'd just talk to you a little bit about some of the thoughts I'd had and some of the kind of personal reactions I'd had. Now I've had a day to digest the concept and also sort of distill down my feelings about it. So that's what this video is about. While I'm talking, I'm going to be working on this interesting weapon here. And if you don't recognise it, it's quite new. This is the Pale Spear, which is the Primarch Alpharius's signature weapon. And there you go, building this. Now, before I get into talking about Warhammer Adventures, just to tell you what we're going to do, we're going to put a pin into this blade, into the weapon head, and then we're going to extend the pin into the haft of the weapon to give a secure point, because it's a very fragile attachment place there and it will break. That's what we're doing as a bit of a backdrop here. Okay then, so Warhammer Adventures, let's get some ground rules in place before I start talking. I suppose the first thing to say is I'm only offering my opinion on the Warhammer 40,000 element of this. I'm not involved in Sigmar. I don't know the story of Sigmar particularly. Fantasy isn't so much my thing, so I'm not offering any opinion with regards to that element. I'm particularly interested in this product because I am a potential customer. Well, let's say as a parent of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, I'm a potential customer as someone who's enthusiastic about the Warhammer universe and particularly Warhammer 40,000. Clearly the people at Games Workshop who have done the marketing design on this, or the product design, and then thinking about marketing, are aiming it at not so much my eldest daughter who's 12, but certainly my son who is 10. And I'm kind of a recent experience of knowing what it's like bringing up a child through that period of life and in the world of modern media. I suppose as someone who grew up in the 80s, at a time of VHS video rental, and also entered adulthood at the dawn of the internet age when I was about 20 and I went to university. For the first time I got access to the internet via the university computing clusters. At that time it was still highly novel for private individuals in the UK to have access to the internet. I guess I kind of like had a bit of I've got an interesting viewpoint on that, and also I look at it from the point of view of my children. I have to admit, the moment I saw this product idea, I had a bad feeling about it. Something deep down, I just saw it and I thought, this doesn't sit right. It's important to listen to your gut reaction to things and not always overthink things. When you have a gut reaction to something, is to think, why did I have that gut reaction? And then go away and think about it a bit and let all your thoughts distill together, or shall I say condense together. Perhaps that's a better way of putting it, to kind of like really understand what my subconscious was telling me, shall I say. Yeah, as I say, I've slept on that and I think I've got my thoughts together on that now. What bothers me about this? Well, the thing that fundamentally doesn't sit right with me is the basic premise of what they're suggesting. The proposition is, and this is clearly as Games Workshop has stated it, they're producing a line of books, or at least one book, maybe there'll be more, set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe aimed at children between the ages of 8 and 12. There may be some people outside of that age range who will find these books interesting, and I say more power to you if you enjoy perhaps a slightly lighter hearted look at the universe. However, for the younger children, it does bother me. And the reason it bothers me is, as I say, the basic premise. And the basic premise of what they are trying to do is they are trying to turn a sci-fi dystopian universe with strong horror elements into a story for children. Think about that for a moment. Not many people probably consider this, but Warhammer 40,000 content is normally at what I would probably say, to my mind, and some people might argue this, but to my mind it's kind of like somewhere in the 12 to 15 all the way up to 18 sort of maturity range. It's not a kind story by any sense of the word, and it's generally pretty violent. The universe of the 41st millennium is a terrifying place and is full of some of the most terrifying creatures and enemies conceived in science fiction writing. And if you watch the myriad of videos on YouTube saying which empire would win or which sci-fi race would win, and it takes maybe Halo, Star Wars, Starship Troopers and 40k, well, who wins? Well, it's always 40k, and that's because the danger level is so outrageously high. I'm going to do that a little bit deeper. And let's just think about the dystopian element a bit further. In 40k, it is routine for people of, let's say, unfortunate social positioning to be turned into servitors. Servitors are mind-scrubbed slaves who have lost all their rights, all their individuality, and are destined for a life of servitude to whichever branch of the Imperium they are assigned. Now, that's kind of a good example, and a fairly, we could say that's an example that epitomizes what it's like to be in the 40k universe. I mean, it's a pretty oppressive regime, and we can certainly describe having fascist elements in terms of its governance concept, i.e. the individual is subservient to the state, or in this case the empire. Not a nice place. The heroes, and we've got to use inverted commas here, the heroes, the Space Marines, are only heroes in the loosest sense of the term. They are perhaps better described as humanity's best hope of survival against the alien hordes. That doesn't necessarily always make them heroic, and even though there are a lot of heroic portrayals of Space Marines, and that's true of either the Horus Heresy or the 40k universe, such heroism is against a backdrop of the fact that, well, Space Marines are no longer truly human. They've been genetically altered to the point at which they're no longer recognisable as a normal human. And they've not only been genetically altered to make them stronger, tougher and faster than a normal human, they've been mentally altered as well to remove their compassion and their pity and their mercy. And that's because the Space Marines are there to win against a galaxy of the most horrific and uncompromising antagonists you could possibly imagine. Space Marines are not nice, and it's no accident that they carry the nickname, and still carry the nickname, of the Angels of Death, because to most Imperial citizens that is probably the only time they see them, when they bring death. So it bothers me to see a selection of children's cartoon characters put against, alongside a Space Marine as being a hero of the Imperium, because it's dumbing down the right way to characterize what they're doing with this. I suppose you could say it is a form of dumbing down the nature of the universe, but dumbing down isn't quite the right way to put it, because what's actually happening is, it seems that Games Workshop are trying to obfuscate the nature of the 40k universe to try get some sales into this younger age group. Now, I've played lots of 40k games and even Horus Heresy games with my children, and I've played them when they were younger as well, certainly younger than 12 and 10. But it's one thing to say, oh, look at these cool looking figures, let's play a game, I'll tell you how to play it, let's make it a fun, exciting experience. It's then another thing to say, right, let me tell you about the background and the lore to this, which isn't really suitable for your age, certainly in my view, and I guess that's a personal take. You know, my particular perspective as a parent, and it's harder than ever today for kids to maintain their childhood innocence. And it's like saying, well, what's the point of childhood innocence? Well, childhood innocence is about having a nice childhood, and kids don't need to grow up too quickly, and the modern world has a habit of forcing them to do that. So yeah, from my point of view, it's like, yeah, play the game, make some models, do some painting, but I'm not going to say to my kids, right, I want you to read this story now, and it's a 40k story, because they're not really old enough to contextualize what's going on. That's, to me, what I'm uncomfortable with the premise of the Warhammer Adventures in 40k. It's this feeling that they're taking something that is intrinsically adult in nature and trying to market it to a children's audience. It just bothers me, that element of it. As I say, I love doing my hobby with my children, and I very actively encourage them, and I hope that they get into the hobby as they grow up. But at the same time, I also think, yeah, this is or this isn't appropriate for them to see. Let me draw a comparison for you to try visualize how I see this as being. Trying to create a children's version of 40k stories, to me, is akin to trying to create a Aliens story for children. Yeah, it just doesn't go. The Aliens universe has a lot in common with the 40k universe in terms of the maturity of the material. They are both certainly, we could call it mature-ish, definitely aimed at teenagers at the youngest, and in particular young adults and older adults, if you like me. And you could say the same of something like Hellraiser or Predator. It just doesn't translate into being a children's setting for the story, I don't think. I'm giving a very personal opinion here, because every parent has to make their own decisions about what they let their children participate in and what they don't let their children participate in, what they think is appropriate for them and what isn't. And children grow up and mature at different rates. There are 10-year-olds who are more emotionally mature than some 13-year-olds. For me, the basic premise of Warhammer Adventures in 40k for 8 to 12-year-olds, and particularly, that younger age range, it's dissonant, and for me, I don't see why. It just doesn't feel right as a product. At a gut level, feels wrong trying to take this highly dystopian universe with a lot of horror to it and mature themes and trying to turn it into something for children. And it's quite interesting that they seem to have chosen the Necrons as the antagonists. So you have something there that won't bleed. They're robots, so they seem impersonal. Yes, you could say of the 40k enemies or alien races, they're probably the best choice. I mean, certainly Tyranids would be a bit of a whoopsie, and you got to steer well clear of chaos. Including the Space Marines is pretty problematic, I think, in terms of what they represent. If you'd done it with Imperial Guard, maybe a bit less so. Imperial Guard are normal humans. They're not transhumans that have been turned into something that will change their life forever. Space Marine might seem glamorous, but they live very austere lives, and in the main, it's a very strange path to take, being a Space Marine. And I don't imagine this Warhammer fan fiction will be dealing with these issues, but that's the thing, they're there. So you can see that it's some sort of marketing. I can see what the commercial angle is. They're trying to create an appeal in the product range to children, knowing that that means more spending money. It doesn't sit well with me as a parent. Just a brief pause. We have got the hole drilled in the pale spear, not sphere. That's a different part. Alpharius, his venom sphere grenades. Right, so what we'll do now is we will glue in. Oh gosh, that's going to drip. I'm going to glue this side in first. So that's a lot of talking from me about my gut feeling, reaction and thoughts about Warhammer Adventures. I guess this is going to be a very personal thing in terms of how people react. That's nice, isn't it? Just need to close that gap up. Should be able to do that with a bit of rotation. Yeah, very personal thing. I don't know, is there a right answer? Well, I guess clearly if you're in the target audience, as I am, as a parent of children in the age range that Games Workshop are aiming these novels at, then I suppose that is the right answer, isn't it? It's certainly a faithful viewpoint from a potential customer. I read my children a science fiction story called The Search for Wandler, which was written by Tony Delizzi, I think, if I remember rightly. I'll put a correction in the comments or the video if I said his name wrong. I read that to them quite a few years ago, and that's kind of really aimed at sort of maybe children just coming into their teenage years. But it was actually a really good novel to read them when they were a bit younger, and it did have some more grown-up themes to it, you may say. Nothing like the sort of horror elements or anything like that of the 4K universe. They were handled in a careful and sensitive manner. It was appropriate for them. I just can't quite square the circle of that happening for children and fiction that's been written for them, for young children, and fiction that's been written for them set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. As I said at the start of the video, which is a dystopian science fiction setting with strong horror elements. That's my thoughts on that. What do you think? As always, I'd like to hear your thoughts and opinions on this. When you do so, I guess in this instance it'd be quite useful, be quite illuminating for everybody if you just share your personal perspective on this. So are you maybe a teenager or a young adult or a late teenager? Because certainly in my book, young teens shouldn't be having YouTube accounts, but there you go. Or are you a young adult, so maybe in your 20s? You know, what's your feeling about this? Or are you like myself and a parent of children in the age range that this product is pitched at? Perhaps you're a parent of some children who are not yet at that age and will be in, say, a few years' time. So this is a future consideration. Letting your children have access to these books. Yeah, please do share those thoughts. So I think on that note as well, I've also reached a conclusion on the Pale Spear, and it's a very happy conclusion. Everything looks nicely lined up, nice and straight as well. I might just be a little bit more heat bending to do on this just to get it perfect and spot on. I'll probably leave that until I've assembled Alpharius' torso and arms and this is ready to pose in it in position. I'll do the final corrections then and then it'll fit. But yeah, that's come out very nicely, and if you get Alpharius, I would strongly recommend you do a pinning job on this because it's going to be too fragile on its own. It's a great design, and I can see why they've split the parts up. It's for purposes of getting a good cast and avoiding air bubbling. So that's a good design feature, but I think it does require this little bit of extra work. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the Warhammer 40,000 element of Warhammer Adventures from Games Workshop, aimed at 8 to 12-year-olds. Please share your thoughts in the comments. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say on this matter. But other than that, I'd just like to say thank you very much for watching. I'll speak to you next time, and goodbye.